In 1903, a doctor arranged to travel to Colorado, not to treat a patient but to bring his body home for burial. His patient was F.O. Stanley, co-inventor of the Stanley Steamer automobile. He'd just been diagnosed with tuberculosis and given 6 months to live. So his doctor sent him west, figuring the dry mountain air might buy him a little time, and made arrangements to come retrieve the body when it didn't. Instead, within a couple of months, Stanley was hiking 5 miles a day. He went on to live to 91. Grateful to the valley that saved his life, he built a hotel there in 1909, fully electric, with telephones and running water in every room, at a time when the rest of the mountain was still lit by kerosene. Beneath the hotel, he even had a network of tunnels and caves built into the foundation, running under the main building. Practical at the time for staff moving between buildings without going outside in the Colorado winters. It would end up mattering for a very different reason later. This is the real history of the Stanley, the documented facts and the stories that grew up around them. And before we're done, I'm going to show you one detail about a room number that almost everyone gets wrong. The hotel attracted exactly the kind of guests you'd expect from that kind of ambition. The unsinkable Molly Brown recovered there after surviving the Titanic. Theodore Roosevelt stayed. John Philip Sousa performed. Harry Houdini, a personal friend of Stanley's, did magic in the concert hall. Decades later, Bob Dylan played that same stage. For a while, the Stanley was exactly what its founder wanted it to be. The place to be in the American West if you had money and taste. It didn't stay that way. By the time the hotel was decades old, it had fallen into serious disrepair, a faded, half-forgotten version of what it used to be, drifting toward the kind of building people describe as having a presence, even before anything strange gets reported in it. And something strange had already happened early on that set the tone for everything after. 2 years after it opened, in 1911, a storm knocked out the hotel's power. Stanley had gas lanterns installed as backup lighting, and a leak on the second floor slowly filled the wing with flammable gas, without anyone knowing. Late that night, as another storm rolled in, head housekeeper Elizabeth Wilson was making her rounds, lighting those lanterns room by room. The moment she struck a match in room 217, the gas ignited. The explosion tore through the room, the hallway, and the floor beneath it, dropping her straight into the dining room below. It destroyed roughly 10% of the hotel and the entire west wing. Windows shattered on the floor below. A bathtub was reportedly thrown into the air by the blast. Somehow no one died. Wilson came out of it with 2 broken ankles and, by some accounts, a coma. Stanley paid every medical bill and guaranteed her a job for life. She came back to work in 1913 and stayed at the hotel until 1950. That's the documented part. Records, injuries, witnesses. What happened after is where this stops being history and starts being a ghost story. Because a woman that devoted to her job, who came back to the exact room that nearly killed her and stayed for 4 more decades, is exactly the kind of presence people say never really leaves. Guests staying in room 217 today report activity that feels distinctly like housekeeping. Luggage unpacked while they're out, clothes folded that they didn't fold, beds made up around them. Some guests claim they woke up tucked in, still inside the covers, with no memory of anyone entering the room. Lights flicker on and off with no one near the switch, and if you're staying there as an unmarried couple, guests have described a cold, unseen presence settling into the bed between them. Mrs. Wilson, apparently, still enforcing hotel decorum from the other side. Room 217 isn't even the most active spot in the building. The 4th floor is widely considered the epicenter of the hotel's paranormal activity. Shadowy figures in the halls, disembodied voices, the sense of being watched in empty corridors. In 2021, a hotel tour supervisor said she was mysteriously overcome with illness on that exact floor during a tour. Room 401 specifically has its own reputation and its own resident. Guests and tour guides describe a spirit believed to be Lord Dunraven, the same Irish earl who once tried to claim the entire valley for himself decades before Stanley ever arrived. His ghost is said to still linger in 401, uncorking sealed liquor bottles left in the room and, according to more than one account, making his presence known to women staying there alone. The hotel has other named residents too, ones most videos never even get to. There's Paul, a former handyman. Staff say he's the reason equipment and lights in the concert hall switch on with no one near them, as if he's still doing his rounds decades after he stopped needing a paycheck for it. There's Dennis, a more mischievous presence blamed for items going missing and turning up somewhere else in the room entirely. The kind of prank a person plays, not the kind a building does on its own. And there's Pierre, nicknamed the Stanley Streaker, a spirit some tour guides claim specifically targets red-headed guests, appearing and vanishing before anyone can get a clear look. Camera crews have chased these stories directly. When the show Ghost Hunters investigated the property, their team recorded a door in the manor hall that, when it swings a certain way, produces a sound almost identical to a woman screaming. In room 412, the team documented what sounded like a headboard rattling on its own with no wind or draft to explain it. Investigators also picked up unexplained banging in the pipes throughout the building, and one working theory the crew floated was geological, not spiritual. The hotel sits on a bed of limestone and quartz, minerals some paranormal researchers believe can store or amplify residual energy, which could explain why the reported activity is so persistent across so many separate rooms. Then there's the concert hall itself, the room Stanley built for his wife Flora, modeled on Boston's Symphony Hall. Staff and guests say they've heard piano music drifting from the stage late at night when the room is completely empty. Walk in, and it stops. No one's there. Some attribute it to Flora, a skilled pianist in life, still performing for a hotel she never really left. F.O. Stanley himself is said to still walk the property. Staff and guests describe seeing a man in a dark suit strolling through the lobby and the billiard room, his favorite room when he was alive, vanishing when anyone gets close, sometimes appearing behind tour groups in photos taken during investigations. Even the animals stick around. Down the hill from the main hotel is a small unmarked pet cemetery, where past hotel managers buried their own dogs and cats over the years. Guests and staff claim to still hear a golden retriever named Cassie scratching at doors to be let in, and to catch glimpses of a white cat named Comanche wandering the grounds. It's often repeated that this little cemetery inspired Stephen King's novel Pet Sematary. But that one doesn't actually hold up. King's own team has said on record that Pet Sematary was inspired by a real pet cemetery back in Orrington, Maine, not this one. Worth remembering, it's the exact kind of detail that gets attached to a place because it sounds right, not because it's true. This reputation was already decades deep. By the time a struggling writer checked in on a stormy night in 1974, Stephen King and his wife Tabitha arrived at the Stanley on its literal last day of the season. Staff were packing up, and King later said they ended up as the only guests in the entire hotel. Over 100 rooms, and he was walking down corridors of closed, dark, silent doors, with the wind picking up outside. By some accounts, he even encountered two ghostly children in the hallway during that walk, an image that would resurface almost exactly in the finished novel. That night, King dreamed his 3-year-old son was running through those same corridors, looking back over his shoulder, screaming, chased by something he couldn't outrun. He woke up in a full sweat, lit a cigarette, and by the time it was finished, he had the outline of an entire novel. The Overlook Hotel, Jack Torrance, the isolation, all of it seeded in one night in room 217. And now the detail I promised you at the top, the one almost nobody gets right. Room 237, the room from the movie. It doesn't exist at the real Stanley Hotel, it never has. And the film wasn't even shot here at all. Kubrick filmed the interiors in England and the exteriors at Timberline Lodge in Oregon, where management asked him to change the room number specifically so no guest could accidentally book the haunted room because there was no room 237 to book. The real 217, with the real history, is the one back in Colorado. It still books out months in advance. One more. When Jim Carrey filmed Dumb and Dumber on location in 1994, he stayed in room 217. He reportedly left in the middle of the night and never went back. So here's where the line actually sits. The 1911 explosion is documented. Real injuries, real damage, real records. Everything past that, the footsteps, the piano, Dunraven's ghost in 401, Pierre in the halls, even the golden retriever still scratching at doors, is guest testimony and popular legend that's built up over more than a century. Some of it accurate to what people genuinely experienced, some of it like the Pet Sematary story, just repeated until it hardened into fact. That doesn't make any of it worthless. It just means it's a different category of true than the explosion is. I'm not here to tell you Mrs. Wilson isn't still turning down that bed, or that Dunraven isn't still uncorking bottles in room 401. I'm just here to tell you which parts of this story you're taking on faith, and which parts you're not. Room 217 doesn't need the folklore to have a real documented reason to be the most requested room in the hotel. It just happens to have one anyway. If you've stayed at the Stanley, room 217, the 4th floor, anywhere on that property, I want to hear it. Not the story you read online, the one that actually happened to you or to someone you know. What did you see? What did you hear? Did the lights do something they shouldn't have? Drop it below. I read every single one of these, and if enough of you have stories about that 4th floor specifically, that's a video on its own, built entirely from what you tell me.